It's time again for another installment of the basics, and as some of you might be aware, I have just recently completed building a Hirogen deck. And this is a mainly Delta Quadrant deck, and I wanted to go over the personnel, the ships, and the equipment I've chosen for this deck and why I've done that. And I think this is a big aspect of anybody's Hirogen deck. So let's get into it, shall we? Now, because of the way the Hirogen personnel are laid out in the game, especially with their attributes and staffing requirements, what I've done is I've come up with personnel that's a combination of normal Hirogen, universal Hirogen, as well as some holograms and a couple non-aligned personnel that I think work well with this deck. And I'll explain. I have multiple copies of these universal personnel in this deck because, let's face it, when you're building a Hirogen deck, the skills aren't as plentiful as other affiliations. And because they're universal, you can use multiple copies in your deck. So Devar, Varond, Jatar, Ranjan, and Konarik. I have 2 to 3 copies of each of them in the deck. I also have rares like Turanj, Netek, Dekaran, which is very useful, and Universal Takarak, which has a command icon and some very good attributes. I have combination dual affiliation holographic personnel, mainly just these three though. I don't want to have too many holographic personnel in one deck because if your holographic door or holo emitters or any card that brings them out gets knocked out too quickly, if you have a high percentage of holographic personnel, you're going to run into problems. So I basically just have these three: Doran, Sumac, and Dar. I've chosen them because of their secondary attributes, especially Sumac, who is in science, but he has engineer and stellar cartography. It's very useful. My 2 non-aligned personnel that I've included are the Artificial Intelligence and Sullen, both from the think tank. They're both Delta Quadrant. They have awesome attributes which can help me overcome missions as well as some dilemmas. In terms of ships, I was debating between 3 to 5 ships in this deck. I've started with 3, so 2 Venatic Hunters and 1 hunting vessel. Venatic Hunters themselves are awesome ships, range of 9, weapons 10, shields 12, they have holodecks and tractor beams. The hunting vessel itself is a light cruiser. X equals 7 for weapons, plus the number of your other staffed Hirogen ships here. So it would be 7 plus 2, so it would be weapons of 9 because of my 2 other ships. Or if I include a 4th ship, it would be weapons of 10. So either way, it's kind of win-win for the ships. I love the Hirogen ships. They're actually pretty damn good. Now, equipment is where it gets tricky because it's hard to cobble together a lot of equipment cards for the Hirogen. And recently, I came into commons and uncommons from the Borg set. I got extra of the Hirogen Disruptor Rifle. I now have 3 of them in this deck. And I have 2 of the Hirogen Talon. Those are all of my Hirogen equipment. Unfortunately, I only have 5 pieces, but it's enough to make this deck. And what I've also done, because this is a hunting / piss your opponent off deck, I've included the Echo Papa 607 killer drone and 3 copies of it. Used during away team or rogue Borg battles. First time used in battle, strength equals 10. Next time, strength equals 20, etc. They just keep multiplying. A very useful card to have in a deck when you're short on strength or cunning enhancing equipment like I do with this deck. Very useful card, very underrated. You could pretty much use it in any deck, but I prefer to use it in decks of either non-aligned Cardassian or in this case Hirogen. So that is the main breakdown of personnel, ships, and equipment in this deck. I might get into a follow-up episode where I show you my power cards and missions, but I've used multiple copies of several missions to make it easier on me to play the game. Now, I know you've heard me say on previous episodes of this show that I'm not big on using a ton of universal personnel and or ships, more so personnel. But when it comes to Hirogen, because of the limited number of personnel and their attributes, you really got to double down on the universal personnel, even triple down on them like I've showed you here. You can complement them with your command staff level cards and a couple non-aligned, but a race such as the Hirogen in this game, and to a lesser extent the Vidians, you're going to need the bulk of those universal personnel to do your missions and encounter the dilemmas. So get them in there. Anyways, that's all for today. Have a great day, everybody.